Good morning. It is 9:49 a.m. on Sunday, June 23rd, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. And because it's Sunday, I'm continuing my rewatch of Gravity Falls with Season 2, Episode 9, The Love God. Now, this episode is fun in a number of ways for having a lot of silly references in it and having sort of half a lesson in it in the sense of Mabel wanting to be this matchmaker figure and encountering an actual love god and the whole thing, but it still leaves kind of the moral lesson in the episode is as half baked as Grunkle Stan's crazy balloon. We'll talk about it, but it's there's lots of fun silliness in it, even if I don't think this episode holds together thematically as well as some of the best ones. But we begin with demonstrating that Dipper and Mabel have been pretty well integrated into Wendy's group of friends. So they're still the youngest in the group by far. They're 12-year-olds in a group with a bunch of teenagers, but it is what it is. They're doing all right. They're hanging out in the cemetery looking at clouds, and there's the start of the running gag where Thompson is just sort of the group punching bag. Everyone makes fun of him. Everyone makes him do stuff, and he just does it. And the show does actually play it like it's, funny to have everybody pick on him. And it's another one where we'll come around at the end to talk about whether the show's ultimate message is what it means it to be. But in any event, it's set up as Dipper is fitting in with the crowd partly by virtue of him joining in with them on picking on Thompson. And it's not overly mean-spirited, but it's just like, hey, oh, lick the sponge, lick this old sponge, lick it. And then when he licks it, they say, oh, I can't believe you did it. It's like that sort of thing, and making him do stuff. And it's not extreme, but anyway, but he's fitting in with the group fairly well, and they talk about the upcoming Woodstick Festival, which apparently involves a music festival and also hot air balloons in ways that are not obviously connected, but sure, why not? Festivals are weird that way sometimes. But connected to that, we revisit Robbie, who is still distraught over his breakup with Wendy, and it's depicted as pretty much it's a standard breakup where he can't get over it, and but there's not a lot of mention of the fact that they broke up because he tried to hypnotize her, which is kind of that's not really great. Actually, let me briefly, I'm looking it up just to remind myself exactly what it was that so it wasn't that he tried to hypnotize her. That was unintentional, but he did lie about stealing the song. And so I think that was, I suppose now that I'm remembering it more clearly, I suppose it makes sense that they don't need to make it about the hypnosis. But in any event, he's distraught, not happy, and we have one of Mabel's tendencies is everybody has to be happy, and she has a chart with faces of everybody in their peer group, and she puts stickers with happy or sad faces, and it's like, and so we can understand certainly that the desire to make people happy is not inherently bad. Being a people pleaser pathologically can be bad, and I think that the show sort of tacitly understands this a little bit in the sense that when Mabel is being driven to meddle here by this desire that everybody has to be happy, which means that she cannot mind her own business because not everybody's happy, which it's one of those traits where there's elements of it, and to a degree it's a positive thing, but it can certainly lead to bad things. But at least in the sense of reaching out to him and trying to, reach him in his sadness, that's not a bad thing necessarily. But what she promises him, though, in her attempt to cheer him up, is that she's going to find him a new girlfriend, guaranteed, or twice the sadness back, which is a funny way to promise it. But he essentially just sets her, she essentially sets him up on a date with one of his existing friends, Tambry, which she has concluded is the perfect match in her. It's a fun little sequence where we see that she's gotten a whole elaborate diorama of the town built. She wears these little heart-shaped sunglasses and little wooden dolls of all the people in town. That's a pretty fun sequence, and it definitely plays into this whole sort of playing God type of idea where she is going to matchmake and everything. So initially, though, the date goes terribly because it was surprise to both of them. Like, it was imagine being set up on a blind date, which is already awkward, only to discover that the person is, yeah, so not a funny way to promise it, lampshading by writers, except that that's not what happens at the end, though. I mean, it's what happens is that she's successful. But so, well, yeah, so in the comments here, Kim Fortuner has said, not a funny way to promise it, lampshading by writers, but it's, I would agree, except that that's not what happens at the end, which we'll talk about in a moment. But so we have the date, but like, imagine being set up on a blind date only to have it be someone that not only do you already know, but actually don't like very much. That seems like, so they're initially fighting. It's going very poorly, and the resulting is that that it seems like it's going bad. But then the love god shows up, and we've had this guy introduced to have the as one of the performances in this Woodstick Festival. And apparently his whole gig, after being made famous in a viral video, is that he makes people fall in love. And Mabel finds that inspiring, because isn't love beautiful? And it's fun that this guy is kind of portrayed as like, he is this big, clumsy, sloppy guy who's kind of lounging around acting like a rock star, and has got little wings on him and a shirt that's too small, and he's got these various little potions, and he's just going around making people fall in love. And that's kind of a fun character. And so he shows up at the diner and does his shtick on a couple of people in order to earn himself a free lunch. And then Mabel approaches, is like, how do you do it? Turns out, actual love god. Well, that works, doesn't it? That makes sense. But apparently his powers work via magic potion, where you put it on your fingers and then snap and point, and that's what it's supposed to do, which is a little bit surprising that they set that mechanic up, given that that's not how Mabel uses it. And it's not how it's ever used again. He does it that way, but then when Mabel steals love potion to make two people who don't like each other involuntarily fall in love, that's not really cool, Mabel. But in any event, Mabel is, she just basically pours some on their fries. And then they try it, and it works. And so now Robbie and Tambry are in love, and they're a super couple. And so Mabel is thrilled with the success. She has solved the problem. Now everybody will be happy, only to have her go and tell the rest of this friend group what what has been done. She doesn't mention her involvement, but says, oh, Robbie and Tambry dating now. Only it turns out this is a big problem for the rest of the group because one of the other guys had his own crush on Tambry, and then one of the other guys is like, oh, you didn't tell me that you had that crush. I thought I asked you. And then, Wendy is saying, I can't believe that she would date my ex without even talking to me about it. And so now everybody's mad and the friend group is totally breaking up. And it's kind of fun that Thompson is left behind there talking to Mabel about just like, do you understand what I've been through to try to keep this group together? So that's kind of fun about it, the idea that he is very conscious of his role in the group. But it's also kind of not great psychologically if we want to think of Thompson as a real person, that he subjects himself to constant humiliation knowingly because his group of friends that otherwise wouldn't be friends will stay friends with him. That's dubious. I mean, we don't want to necessarily over-examine some of this stuff when it's just intended to be silly, but it's just a question of when the show tries to build in some moral lessons, it kind of opens the door for those questions, right? Anyway, though, we have, this has all gone wrong. So Mabel and Dipper are discussing, what can we do? Can we fix it? Maybe what we need to do is see if the love god has another potion that we can give to undo it. Turns out there is an anti-love potion, and they try to take it, but he is onto them now in terms of they stole something from him. They take it. There's a chase. There's a whole sequence where the love god conjures all of Mabel's past crushes to persuade her to hand this potion back. But and that's an interesting sequence just to remind us as the viewer of all the different people she's had a crush on over the course of the series. And it does work. But then also this is where the two plot lines interact and the balloon crashes on Love God, which we'll come back to in a moment because that's a fun side story. But in any event, she is able to get it back. And so, again, like this potion is in a spray bottle. But at this point, though, when she goes and has this anti-love potion and they go and they see Robbie and Tambry, essentially the idea of taking this new couple that is happy and breaking them up with this potion doesn't feel right, and she decides not to do it. And so the problem here is it's one thing, and it's easy for us to say, oh, isn't it better if they're happy? But also they're happy because of a magic potion, and it's not clear exactly the episode, and it is magic, right? But like, if they're happy together because of a magic potion, is that mind control? Is the love real? Or it's like, it really is left kind of nebulous. And what that means is essentially that the heartwarming ending involves Mabel deciding to let her original bad decision stand. So, on the one hand, though, like at least on a micro level, it involves Mabel taking a moment to think that maybe she does not need to micromanage and control every aspect of everybody's relationship. That's certainly a good lesson. But the idea that like, oh, well, these people who are under mind control magic seem happy right now, so let's just leave it. But the resolution, of course, and Dipper's right there, is the idea that if these tensions were always there under the surface, maybe it's a little better actually to not let the, to not try to just undo it and continue to meddle and make things worse, because maybe if the friend group really does belong together, maybe they'll reconcile on their own. And of course they do. And they eventually all bond together once again through the antics of Thompson, who has, there's been a whole side plot where they taped a bunch of snacks to him so that they could smuggle outside food into the festival, and that gets discovered by the security guard. He drops a cake, and then he's hanging from a rope while the security guards are trying to hit him, and it's making snacks fall off of him like a piñata. It's all very silly, and that does sort of reunite the group, and it suggests Thompson's antics are effective once again at keeping this group together. And it's, again, a question of like, well, how good is that for Thompson, really? Is that a healthy way to deal with your friend group? Maybe not. I don't know. But in any event, it's a little bit of a weird lesson at the end to say it was a mistake to use the magic love potion on them, but then once you did, it's better to leave it in place than to undo it because, what? it's a little bit unclear. But let's briefly touch on the some of the other silly things in it, like when we I have to give some special note to one of Mabel's other former matches is, of course, Seuss and Melody, who are still having a long-distance relationship online, which is nice. But the other example is Waddles and Gompers, her pet pig, and the local goat, who she has taped together with a top hat and a bridal veil. And they are now a married couple, apparently, by virtue of having been taped together. And that's very silly, and I appreciate that, especially the end credits sequence that plays a little sappy love song over them. A pig and a goat. But that's all very silly. And then, of course, we also have the subplot with Seuss and Grunkle Stan, where, oh no, it's the Woodstick Festival. It's going to be a bunch of hippies, and Stan hates them. And there's literally jokes about him trying to shoot down their hot air balloons and locking up the shack. But then Seuss says, no, maybe you need to think of these people as potential customers. And so he decides he's going to make his own balloon, and it's all very silly because he has intended to make a big smiling version of his own face, and with a message that says, I heart kids, and heart written out as a word and not the symbol, which is relevant in when things go terribly wrong. But we see him taking all sorts of shortcuts because it's Grunkle Stan, and that's how he operates. But, of course, the payoff is that when he debuts the balloon, not only does it look horrible, it's this horrible, leering, grimacing version of his face. And then some of the letters fall off, so instead of saying, I heart kids, it says, I eat kids. And then as it descends on the festival, it catches fire. So it's this fiery, burning, grimacing, horrible monster face saying, I eat kids. And, of course, that's very silly. And there's a nice moment where it's like the little kid and his mom on a blanket as this thing's soaring down on them. And it's like, Mommy, is that thing going to eat us? And she's like, yes, honey, it is. And that's all very silly. And then, of course, it crashes into the Love God, which is where it interacts with the other one. So this episode has lots of fun, silly things in it, but certainly I think the lesson, to the extent that we want to say there is one, is a little bit dubious. It's certainly not as, coherent as some of the others, but certainly examining Mabel's tendencies to meddle in other people's business, whether she's welcome to or not, and to be a people pleaser where everyone has to be happy, are things about her that are not automatically bad, but can be bad. And examining when they go too far is, I think, interesting. I also just briefly want to touch on something I missed mentioning last week, which I regretted because the whole subplot through most of the first season and into the second of Dipper's crush on Wendy was, there was kind of a nice payoff to it at the end of, in the middle of the time travel shenanigans last week, where the whole idea of Wendy is just, she's telling him, look, I like you as a friend, but I just don't feel that way. And he's just having trouble dealing with that, and we established that she's like 17 and he's 12, right? And so he's bummed about it, but he's, accepting it and moving on. But then when they travel 10 years into the past and Dipper and Mabel encounter a younger version of Wendy, who's now 7 and he's 12, which incidentally is the exact same age difference, just reversed. And so when little Wendy giggles that she thinks Dipper is cute, and then leaves, Mabel is kind of saying, like, oh, she thinks you're cute. And he's like, yeah, but she's like just a little kid. And then Mabel says, yeah, maybe that's how Wendy felt. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay. And I just thought that was a nice beat to include. And I meant to mention it last week, but forgot. So that is Season 2, Episode 9, The Love God. Next week, we'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 10, Northwest Mansion Mystery, which is another fun episode. And so in the meantime, I will talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.